So if you don't want to be recorded, just put your camera on, take your camera off when you're speaking. Otherwise, we'll only be sharing it with the Biochar networks. It probably won't go much further than that, but just so you know. So yeah, I'm Carolyn. I set up the Blackdown Hills Eco Hub well, we're on the Somerset Devon border, and we did that 2 or 3 years ago, working in a space that is owned by a friend who's called Terry Trim. So he has a wholesale nursery. So Terry was having a few, I'm going to share my slides actually now. Terry was having a few problems with his plants 2.5, 3 years ago, with the rooting of his plants. So that's how we kind of got into biochar, because the composts he was getting were quite poor. He hasn't been using peat for a while, and he'd been trying lots and lots of different alternatives, but wasn't really finding a great solution. The plants would look really, really healthy on top, but then when he pulled them out of the pots to send them off for sale, he's a wholesale nursery at the beginning of the life of the plant, so at the cutting stage. So you need decent kind of root growth before sending it out to clients. And as that wasn't happening, he started to look around and said, what about this biochar? Have you ever heard of it? I'd been working a little bit with him. I said, no, but there's a lot of research articles. So we had a look and started working with biochar. And since then, we're quite new to this whole thing, but we've learned quite a lot. So one of the reasons that we're particularly interested in biochar, and we're in a room full of experts this evening, I see, so they can also add to the discussion because they've got a lot more experience than I have. Basically, one of the challenges we have is we only have 70 to 80 harvests left on Earth due to the erosion of topsoil. So a lot of our farming methods, involving chemicals, ploughing, deforestation, and global warming are all kind of leading to that loss of topsoil. And it does take quite a long time to naturally get that topsoil back. It can take between 500 and 1,000 years. So this is quite alarming. I was talking to somebody, there was a guy who wrote a book about soil and civilizations, which I heard a little bit from last week on a YouTube. And it's really interesting. He was saying, probably the reason why the Mediterranean area actually developed a diet of olives and grapes and tomatoes and things that only need very small amounts of topsoil was basically because it's all eroded from that area very quickly in the past years. So that's quite an interesting kind of concept. It's not all bad news, though, because there are people who are now working on creating lots of really good composts and regenerating that topsoil quite quickly. So there's some good pockets of stuff going on as well. So that top layer is a big problem. And what we often don't realize is, or we don't think about it that often unless we're into soil, that more than half of the Earth's species actually live in the soil. So there's been a few studies recently looking at how many species are in the soil, and there's over 100 billion species, they think. So this is quite an important microorganism system, which most people really aren't aware of. So this is important. Can I just mute anybody who's not muted? So lots and lots of land is becoming very, very degraded. So they think 125 million hectares of land is going to be so degraded that it will no longer reliably produce crops. So that's about 2% of the world's arable land that has been lost by deforestation. But we need to live within the means of our natural capital and soil. So that means not spending it, but saving and building on it as best we can. So this is a photo of Trimplants. So Trimplants is the nursery. And as I said, Terry was having a few problems with the rooting of his cuttings. And that's how we got into looking at biochar. We had met Rob from Exeter Charcoal, and had a few discussions with him. And he talked about the extra retorts that he built. And we discovered that his original prototype was sat in a field at the donkey sanctuary, basically rusting out. And after a few discussions said, is anybody using it? And he said no. And he basically said, if you can get it back, you can use it. You can have it. So it was completely rusted out because it was the very first one that he built. Terry and he made various repairs, and then he came over and we started making biochar. I think most people kind of know what biochar is, but if you don't, it's something that's been around for thousands of years. So it was discovered, or some of the first Europeans that went into the Amazon basin couldn't quite work out why there was this dark earth in certain areas, which was really nutrient rich. It was had high water retention capabilities, and it sustained high yields of vegetables. So that's the earth on the right side of the picture. And next to that was the picture on the left, which was not very fertile at all. And it took a while of investigating, and recently they've discovered that actually that was layers and layers and layers that had been laid down actually by people. So it was laying down charcoal. It was man-made because they found different bits of clay pots and other kind of residues within there. And this is what we're now calling biochar. Sadly, now they're actually digging it out and selling it as compost. So it's a bit of a sad state, really. But applying biochar to soils will lock away carbon as well for centuries. It's basically carbon. It's made from waste, all kinds of waste, organic materials. And the biochar that we've been making, due to the way that we're using it, or we're baking it, we reckon that we're sequestering around 3 kilos of CO2e for each kilo of biochar. So what is biochar? What are the benefits of biochar? Well, I've mentioned a couple. It's good for aerating soils. We're on the Blackdown Hills, we've got a lot of clay. So we're doing various different trials looking at aeration. It really is a great habitat for microbes, and that's some of the research and trials we've been doing with Tom at Plymouth, and Norfell is looking at the microbial activity and how quickly we can get that activity into very small pots. It reduces leaching. Another worry for us in this area is slurry that's put often on the fields directly by farmers. There's not a lot of rules or legislation around that anymore. And the first bit of rain, you have it washing off into the streams. So we had kind of been wanting to do quite a large scale trial, but sadly haven't managed to get the funding yet, but hopefully we will, mixing biochar with slurry in that clay soil and just see what happens. It can reduce toxicity. It changes the soil structure and pH, or it can do if you've got very acidic soils. It can also absorb contaminants from polluted land or water. There's a really nice piece of research that Plymouth University have been involved in on an estate called Fleet Estate, where they've been using biochar with waterways. So maybe Tom can talk a little bit about that as well. And it also enhances crop production. We've seen quite good yields so far. We've also got a community vegetable garden at the Eco Hub. So we set that up in April, and we've used biochar in the garden where we've grown potatoes and onions, and we didn't water them at all because we had all that hot weather, and we didn't want to take the water away from the nursery because that is basically Terry's business. And amazingly, we had an incredible harvest of onions and potatoes, actually, considering what we put in, but the onions were absolutely huge. So biochar can be produced in lots of different ways, and across the globe, many people are producing it. It's difficult because it's made from lots of different feedstocks, from waste wood, agricultural residues, organic waste. And each soil is different. So there's nothing really uniform in the way that biochar is necessarily being made or being developed. And it's also being used differently because each soil is different. There's different kilns and ovens that it's made in, from a ring kiln right up to the kind of stoves we're using, retorts, to power pallets, to really full scale industrial installations, which are also generating electricity and heat and syngas as well. So there's lots of things you can do if you're using a waste material to make biochar, or making biochar at the same time. So for us, we decided to actually see what we could do with the farmers locally here, because every year they're cutting back their hedgerows, and there's a huge amount of waste with the hedgerows, and they are just putting it onto a bonfire and burning it, which of course is increasing CO2 and methane emissions. And of course, with all the storms, I think they've had 10 or 11 to date this year so far, there's been a lot of trees coming down. And we've also got ash dieback, and we've had some willow with a fungus as well. So instead of leaving them on the ground to rot, which is also increasing methane, we thought, okay, maybe that is what we could use to make the biochar. So make it from a waste material. And we've had the case a few times now where if that waste material is not removed from the farmers' fields, then they will not get the DEFRA payment that they're due. So I've also sent a few emails to DEFRA, although I've never had a reply, saying this is a bit crazy because we were unable to get some wood out of an area due to it being so wet. And the farmer was told basically, well, if it's not gone, you won't get the money for that portion of the hedge. So he ended up burning it, which is really sad, because it would only take a few more weeks and we could have got it out. But that's how it is currently. So there are few changes that are probably needed. This is how we make it. We got some funding actually from East Devon, which was great because we got the funding just at the right time as we were starting to scale up a little bit. So Trimplants got the funding as part of a resilience and innovation budget. And we were able to buy 2 Dartmoor dragons. Dartmoor dragons are, again, made by Exeter Charcoal. So you have Rob in the photo there. Rob comes over. We have a lot of workshops that we run at the Eco Hub. And Tom is in the photo there too. So basically we put any wood or brash or hedge clippings inside of the metal drum that you see in the top right-hand corner. And then there are small holes pierced underneath the metal drum. And there's a fire that's lit in the firebox underneath. And then we close the dragon. And as the wood heats up, then basically methane, first of all, steam comes out, but then methane comes out through the holes at the bottom and just heats up and heats up and heats up. And the wood inside doesn't have a lot of oxygen due to it being very well compacted. And it heats up. The methane is burnt off, and we get up to 550, 650, 750 degrees really, really quickly. We have to watch the temperature because the metal bars within the Dartmoor dragons start melting at a certain degree. But it's quite efficient. It's much easier to handle than the extra retort that we had in the first place, at least for me, because getting in there with big logs is not very easy. So we end up with a product like in the bottom left-hand corner, and then we crush that to make biochar. And we're more or less burning most of our wood, or pyrolyzing it, which is the term for baking it, at about 550, 600 degrees. So yeah, this is another photo here. We've kind of made it a very community-driven event because it is so labor intensive. That was the only way really to be able to process it. And a lot of people were really interested in learning more. So we run a lot of workshops. We have biochar days. We now have the community food growing space, but we've also run meetings on things like hedgerow medicine and photographing insects, and had biologists come in and tell us all about, recognizing larvae of ladybirds or whatever and finding them in the hedgerows. And I've done quite a few other events as well. So we're making it much more of a kind of community-driven kind of process. We also sell our biochar, so in starter packs. So I think to date we've sold about 110 packets or so, which we're just getting local people experimenting with. And we're also putting it into pots across the nursery as part of the IRF funding. We wanted to really run trials on a much larger scale. So any plant that comes out from Trimplants will, as the plants go through the growing cycle, will eventually have some biochar in it. So wherever that plant ends up, there will be biochar in the soil, hopefully helping those microbial networks re-establish themselves, because a lot of them are very broken down at the moment, as we know. So our biochar also, Tom did a bit of, we had another project with Plymouth University where we looked at testing biochar in the green walls that are set up there. So he did some lab testing, and Tom can talk more about the green walls in a minute, but he was looking at the thermal capacity of the green wall, and actually adding biochar increased it a little bit, but it could be due to the water retention, or it could be due to the biochar. Not sure which in the end. I don't know if you ever found out, Tom, but you might have. Anyway, I'll let you talk about that more, seeing as you're here. These are some of the fantastic pictures that we've managed to get through this project, because we've been working with the Plymouth Electron Microscopy Centre. They were part of the project. And Jess, who is working in the centre, has been amazing. She's just had so much passion for biochar. You can see the hyphae networks, you can see mycorrhiza, you can see a worm egg, you can see these different microorganisms that are showing up in these scans of a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of biochar. So that's been absolutely fascinating. And we were lucky enough to go and visit and have had a look at all the machinery. So that's been really interesting as well. And then she's got some really good machines that can show everything in color, which is even more amazing. And also looking at all of the chemical elements. And these are the chemical elements, the colors. The red is carbon, and the other colors, yellow is silica. And then you've got the different elements with nitrogen and potassium, and it's just sticking to the biochar. So we can actually see that. And with one of the machines, they can actually test exactly what chemicals are within the biochar or on the biochar as well. And biochar does that because it has negative ions, so it tracks everything with a positive ion, hence why it pulls contaminants towards it. In our earlier trials last year, I planted about 60, 70 pots with 4 different mixes with lots of different vegetables. Because we were already doing it across the nursery, I thought, why don't we try it with a few vegetables on a small scale, just to see what's happening. And there was a massive difference, actually. The lettuce on the right, the biggest one, which was about 5 or 6 times the size of the other 3 beside it, or there's 2 in the picture, but there was a third one, was 10% of biochar that was mixed throughout the compost. The one next to it was 30% of biochar mixed throughout the compost, so that's small growth. The other one was just compost. And a third one, which is the same size as those 2, was biochar just at the root of the plant. So it seems to make a difference if you actually mix the compost and the biochar more evenly, rather than putting it in a clump just at the root of the plant. And the radish that you see, the small radish, is a fairly big normal sized radish. The other one was absolutely huge. And we really thought it's going to taste very dry and very woody, but it didn't. It tasted exactly the same as the small radish. And that was actually my mum who grew those. She was very skeptical about biochar, but she said, okay, I'll test half a row. So she did test half a row, and that was the result. So now she's convinced. We also tried growing seeds just in biochar, inoculated biochar, and seeds in the normal mix that Terry grows his plants in. And again, the biochar seeds just looked so much more healthy and was much thicker as they were coming up. So we've seen significant changes, not necessarily in everything. Some vegetables like cauliflower didn't really notice much difference. Beans, there was quite a lot of difference, but they seem to grow quicker as well. And with broad beans, I planted a couple of rows of broad beans, one row with biochar, one row without. And although there wasn't much difference in the early growth, what happened was the row with biochar resisted a slug attack. So the slugs ate all of the first row, but nothing in the second row. So need to do a lot more testing, but that was anecdotally quite interesting. Biochar actually plays quite a role in quite a few of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's being used in building materials. I've been having various discussions with somebody in Norfolk who is using it in, they're using hemp biochar in brick making in the building industry. I've heard of people trying to use it in cement. I don't think that's necessarily that easy because I think it produces air bubbles, but maybe they found a different biochar to use. I've had discussions with a researcher as well in Norway who's using it for, I think they're using it for insulation, but they're using it quite a lot because they're able to sequester carbon, of course, if they're putting biochar into things, and they're using waste materials. So that's all quite an interesting way of actually biochar becoming a bit more mainstream. You can use the rice husks or the wheat yields, whatever is left in the fields can be made into biochar and can be put back into the ground. So there's a lot happening at the moment, and I think it's just increasing. We've had various discussions and have recently met a tree surgeon who is really interested in working a bit more with us. He's got the contract to maintain all the roads around Devon, and I think has a proposal in for Somerset and Dorset. So there's a huge amount of wood on those roads, and at the moment he's shipping it out to Norway and to Europe, and he'd like to have it actually be used locally, whatever the wood that he can't sell. So that would be great if we could find a way to do that, but that'll really mean us scaling up to a much bigger machine and having a bit more of an automatic kind of process than the Dartmoor Dragons. We're also working, or we've worked in the past with Matt at Western Geobuild. He's been installing various green walls around the Exeter area. And he's also using green walls for flood defences as well. So again, using the biochar to really absorb, to retain the moisture in those situations. And then the green wall at the bottom is the new green wall at Plymouth University, where Tom has added biochar, or one of Tom's students, I think, has installed it. But different percentages of biochar in the different pots. We've also been doing some work with YGS Landscapes, who have just created a new charity called Societree, and they've been building microforests in schools across Plymouth. Their aim is to have a microforest in every school to sequester carbon, CO2, but also to give children that green environment close by. And they're making like a little keyhole where children can actually have a class within the microforest. And the technique that Steve is using is a Japanese technique, which includes biochar, because you basically have 650 trees within a very tiny area, the size of a tennis court, basically. So it needs quite a lot of support. So he had the experience last year when it was, actually the year before last, when it was very, very hot. Some of the trees that he'd planted without biochar, they all died during that hot period, but the ones with biochar actually survived. So he's totally convinced that biochar is really important for what he's doing. We've also given 3 big dumpy bags of biochar to an environment agency as well to clean up a diesel spillage on farmland. So we'll have results from those trials as well and see how they got on in the coming weeks, hopefully. In the summer, we had carbon farmers joined us, and they've built a really nice kind of biochar creating machine on the left, which is also a stove. So the guy who created it, he lived in Kenya for many years, so he used biochar to clean water. So he's been using it for years. So when he came back, he had a look to see what he could do. So he's actually created the stove. So you're making biochar from just a very small number of twigs that you put in one end. You've got the barbecue on the top, you've got a grill underneath. You can put a saucepan or a kettle on the back and make bread on the front. But these kind of small stoves are actually helping as well in developing countries where it can really lower deforestation and also lowers the emissions from soot and carbon dioxide in those families as they're, instead of going to collect firewood, they can just use the brush or corn husks to make biochar and then put the biochar back into the soil. So actually helping with stopping slash and burn, because they're actually able to stay in the same place as well. They can bury it in their fields, and then the harvests are actually improved as well. As I said, we've created a food community, so we've been trying out our biochar within that space as well. We've had a really good harvest. We had fantastic harvest of beans. We had thousands of beans. Squash has been amazing as well. Lots of different types of squash, sweet corn, and the onions were just huge. So a lot of the community larders around here and people in the various villages have received quite a lot of our fresh vegetables. I mean, I'm really interesting. I saw Elizabeth was on the call earlier after my call with you, Elizabeth, I don't know, maybe a year ago. I'm really interested in seeing if we're increasing that microbial activity at the root. Are we actually changing the content, the nutritional value of the leaf? Because of course our gut microbiomes have become so narrow now. If there's any way of us extending that, or actually having a vegetable or a leaf that's actually healthier or more nutritional, has a higher value, then that would be something that would be really interesting. So I'm really looking forward to do some very basic trials, maybe without the academic rigor in the first place. We're just setting up 3 trial vegetable beds. We've managed to get a little bit of funding to set up 3 beds, and Tom has kindly given me a plan for the different mixes we're going to put in each of the beds. And if we can get a few students involved, then we might be able to do some more in-depth analysis on that later in the year. And then if you look at biochar as kind of in a systemic kind of context, then you can see it's kind of a full cycle. So you can be using the waste product, you can be making biochar, which then can stop runoff or pollution of the river systems. It is complex, and it's very, very labor intensive unless you've got a lot of money to be able to buy the more industrial kind of machines that are needed. I'm not sure we want loads of industrial machines, but we could have a few that are actually dealing with waste. Cornell University have been doing quite a lot of research, and they reckon that we could offset 12% of the total CO2 emissions in the UK just by making biochar out of some of the waste materials. I know there's a biochar installation that's just been created next to a chocolate factory in Hamburg. So people are starting to do this, you know, using the waste husks from the materials from the chocolate making. So yeah, there's a lot of potential. And it would be good if we're just using waste, that people don't start cutting down forests just to make biochar. That would kind of defeat the object. But it is a way to sequester a huge amount of carbon as well in the soil, which would also restore some of those lost microbial networks. So I'm going to leave it there. Let's stop sharing. So that's a bit of an introduction into everything that we're doing. Does anybody have any questions before we go on to the exciting part, which is some of the results that Tom's getting from our recent project? Put your hand up or put something in chat or whatever.
Just a quick question about the growing mediums that you're experimenting with at Trimplants. So looking for alternatives to peat. And are you kind of using biochar as a like-for-like replacement, or what are you mixing the biochar with?
We're mixing it with, yeah, it's not a replacement really, but we were looking to see if it might be.
Yeah.
But we're using a commercial compost. So it's a Melcourt compost.
Yeah.
But Terry also uses worm castings. I mean, when we're doing the biochar mixes, we're inoculating it with a compost tea that we're making at the nursery. Right. So it's an aerated compost tea made from the compost. It's almost like a huge tea bag compost that he's using for the nursery, which is a commercial compost, plus worm castings, plus molasses, plus, I don't know, we keep trying different things, but that's the three main things. I've tried things with seaweed extract, nettle juice. We keep, well, for the research, we're trying to keep it the same every time. But on the side, I'm experimenting with lots of different mixes. And my homemade compost, we did use a compost that Terry had lying in the field that he made out of, it's basically wood chip that's just completely rotted down that was in the field. So we have done some tests with that as well, which Tom will show you. We thought we'd add that into the mix just to see. But yeah, so it's been quite interesting.
Great. So Tom is going to talk more about that. There's growing mediums as he is part of the talk. Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
I think there's another question. Yeah.
Sorry, I just need. Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
You are.
Okay, cool. Yeah, super interesting so far. Thank you. My name's Philip. I'm a complete novice. I'm not a professor or a scientist, and I live off grid. And I have a log burner. And actually, I'll just very quickly spin the camera in. You'll see the log burner's over there somewhere.
Yeah.
I have a whole of the houseplants, masses and masses of houseplants.
Great.
And so it's slightly random, really. I when the log burner's lit at the start, it needs lots of oxygen to get going, but then I reduce the oxygen into a very slow burn, and I'm left with a little pile of well, what I would thought might be biochar, and I've been using it in the plants, and I've just the house plants, and I've seen such an exceptional difference in the growth of the plants. So I thought this is why I'm suddenly got interested, and then Transition Town Wellington posted on the website that you're having this Zoom this evening, and I thought, oh, this is really fascinating. So my question is the product left after the burn of the log burner, which I absolutely require because I grow my own wood, by the way. It's not like I'm harvesting forests and things like that. So it's totally reliant on the heating and the water and everything. So it's totally off grid. Is what's left in the fire biochar? Or is it something else?
I'm not sure it is. There are other biochar experts on here. I think it's more ash, but you can, I've seen Tom, do you know? Because I would say that that's more ash and
I have ash as well.
yeah, but
I separate
it's not
it.
pyrolyzed in the way that biochar would be pyrolyzed.
Okay.
As
I
far
think
as
it's. Can I say hello, Philip? It must be a temperature thing, Philip. Yeah, I think there is real value in burning all wood to charcoal and harvesting the embers from a fire.
Okay.
And I encourage people to do that and add it to their composts, because it's better to have a structure for microorganisms to live in, and not have ash. It's better to have the carbon. You're still helping make fire more carbon negative and climate positive by harvesting the ash. It's whether you're making the quality of material that is biochar, which really has to be done at that temperature range, 400 to 600 degrees, that you can then sort of sell as biochar and really claim the kind of amazing, other benefits of there's the cation exchange capacity and loads of other stuff going on. My perspective is it's better to burn wood to charcoal and use the charcoal for the soil, but we can't call it biochar.
Sure. Okay. That's interesting. It's a super hot burn and almost without oxygen towards the end. So yeah, it might be close. But
yeah,
it certainly,
might
makes a huge difference to the houseplants. I was just really quite surprised. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I've tried with soot as well. My chimney sweep was saying, well, what's the difference between I said, I don't think that's anything like it. But he said there are some guys, some old guys on allotment who've been taking his soot for like 20 years or something, and they just swear by it. But I must say I did try it, but it didn't really work. For me, it's about the tars that are in it as well. So can you eliminate the tars at a lower temperature? You might not be able to. I mean, you kind of have to be careful with what you're putting back in your soil as well. Like we haven't done those tests yet. There might be some research out there, but how much, if you're burning laurel, if you're making biochar from laurel, how much arsenic is staying in that laurel at 550, 650 degrees? We wouldn't want to risk it. I mean, Rob from Exeter Charcoal, he made some biochar from sargassum, because sargassum is like a very invasive species. So he had to go. But the issue is it's full of heavy metals. You really wouldn't want to put that anywhere near any vegetables. And that's because, our seas are so polluted at the moment. But it was full of heavy metals. It's quite surprising, really. I mean, he also made it out of horse manure. He's been trying lots of experiments lately, and a waste product from breweries. They're called Tide or something, I think. But that was actually, out of those three, which would you think would be the highest in carbon? Anybody have any ideas? No, it was actually the brewery waste, which was quite surprising. So the brewery waste was really high in carbon.
What, it made the most charcoal? The brewery
No,
waste?
the actual content of carbon in the biochar. Wow. So that was quite interesting. Yeah. So we could also be making biochar out of
what dried spent beer mash and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. Excellent.
So that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's the volatile organic VOC content, isn't it? That's the thing that you've got to be able to measure, and the reason you need the temperatures to make an actual biochar. Yeah.
I might send you a sample. You can have a look at it.
Send it to Tom, the other Tom.
Yeah.
Shall mute myself again.
Okay. Are there any other questions, or shall we let Tom present his part?
Just a quick one, Carolyn. Sorry, you maybe ignorant type question, but you also mentioned cleaning. It was used also for, at one point you mentioned cleaning water or cleaning. Is that because it acts as a filter? Is that what is that advantage? I mean, where do you get that?
It's basically its structure. It's got a very, very porous structure, but it's also got a negative ion. So it tracks everything that's positive towards it. So many chemicals. So if you were to put biochar directly in the soil, it would take all of the goodness, all of the nitrogen, whatever was in the soil around it, it would just sponge it up because everything just goes towards it. So if you've got contaminated land, for instance, you can use biochar to clean it up, and that's been done in a few cases. Actually, there was a French professor who has quite a nice case where she went into an area of land that had very heavy mining and different contaminants, and nothing really was growing there apart from, I've forgotten what the plants were, but I'll have to find it again, because I was asking Terry if we could get hold of those plants. I think it's probably, he'd never heard of them, and he's pretty good on plants. So, but she basically put biochar across the whole area and then started growing these 2 specific plants, and the plants basically absorbed with the biochar. The biochar broke down the residue, the chemical contamination that was in the soil. Plants absorbed it, and then she started looking at the leaves and ended up selling the leaves to a pharma company because they could use those chemicals. So you ended up with a full cycle. And I know Nicola Peel, when she was with us in the summer, she's been using biochar in Ecuador and in Sierra Leone for about 20 years. And they've been using biochar for oil spills. And they've actually found a fungus that actually then grows, the biochar absorbs all of the oil. And then there's a fungus that's actually been growing on that oil and breaking it down. So it's been completely cleaning very contaminated land. So there's quite a bit of evidence out there of different people doing different things with it. And there's various papers that have been written. So yeah, it's very good at absorbing. There are some microorganisms as well that just get completely, once they're in, they don't even need to have the nutritional value, if you like, of the biochar that's inoculated. We always inoculate the biochar before putting it in the soil. They don't even need that. Somehow they probably have a positive ion in them and start rushing around just as soon as they get in contact with biochar. I've seen another study on that quite recently, so that's quite interesting as well. So yeah. Tom?
Shall I get going?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Share my screen.
Thank you, Caroline. That was great.
Welcome.
Okay. Start from the beginning. It's always a good place to start. So hopefully you can all see that clearly. Yeah, so it's really nice to meet you all, and it's really great that we've got people interested in our project. So I suppose building on what Carolyn was giving you the bigger picture of about all the work that that she and Terry have been working on through Trimplants and Blackdown Hills Eco Hub around biochar. What we're going to do is, and what I'm going to do today is just give you a description of and a summary of this small project which we've managed to get some funding for. So it's not it's a small pot of money from the University of Plymouth. So we were lucky to have Enterprise Solutions, who are a partner within the university, who help us as academics to work with different businesses. Our project is called Growing in Small Spaces, and really looking at the influence of biochar and its inoculant, and how we can start to think about reducing our fertilizer use. So yeah, my name's Tom, so I'm on the project. We've also got Now Fell, who unfortunately couldn't join us yesterday and can't join us today because he's got an illness. Dr. Jess Berry as well, who's involved in the microscopy work, and then Terry and Carolyn have been big parts of this project. So first of all, just a little bit of an introduction. So my name's Thomas Murphy. I'm an applied environmental scientist. I describe myself, and I really look at plant restoration and soil science. So I dabble in lots of different areas, particularly around plant and soil interactions, but I also come into contact with how we achieve environmental change. So those social impacts and those social mechanisms are often one of the big barriers and a lot of the added value to certain environmental solutions. So I find that very interesting. So I work on native woodland restoration, but also green infrastructure projects. And these are two particular environments which I use my I study in particular. So something called temperate rainforest, which we have in all up the west coast of Europe. So yeah, I'm involved in lots of woodland restoration, and I will talk about that towards the end of the presentation in terms of some of the application of biochar and some of the circular approach of this product really, in terms of finding a use for and making use of and thinking about woodlands as productive habitats, but also when we're thinking about woodland restoration and how we use biochar, but also in green infrastructure. So I'll give you a specific case study about how we've started to use biochar because it's a product that I've only become aware of in the last few years after meeting Terry and Caroline and becoming involved in green infrastructure projects. So this is our team. It's a real pleasure to be working with people who are actually getting on with things and actually doing some amazing work in terms of outreach and really making a real difference locally. And I think that sort of passion is really great to work with. So it's great to be working with Karen and Terry on this sort of project. So I'll give you a bit of a potted history then about how I became involved in biochar and also how we started to think about this growing in small spaces project. So I was involved in a project called Low Carbon Devon, where we turned. So it was a European funded project, so a multi-million-pound project based on our University of Plymouth campus, and it looked at essentially two parts. So we looked at retrofitting an existing building. So we took this fairly ugly and energy intensive and leaky building. We put this. We installed a number of different environmental measures. So we managed to achieve SCAR Gold standard rating on this building. So we had a range of different measures. One of those included a green wall. We also had a range of different events and around low carbon technologies, but also around working with business. So we had 4 different academic areas with supervisory teams, and we looked at working with particularly SMEs, so businesses who really could do with research support to help them try to achieve some interesting low carbon opportunities and make use of that. So that was a really useful project. We had a series of funded internship as well for local businesses of low carbon. So we got a number of publications out of that, and as part of this, I was lucky enough to work with Trimplants as an organisation. So one of my responsibility was as a Green Walls Industrial Research Fellow. So we were particularly looking at green infrastructure. So at the start of the project, we had the installation of our green wall on our building, and we found a significant saving, an insulation saving from simply having this green wall on the outside of the building. So we many of our buildings, as you'll know, particularly our existing building stock, are big source of emissions. And we found that having our green wall gave us a 31.4% reduction in our U value, which was essentially equivalent to cavity fill insulation, which I think is really, we got lots of attention from different organisations around the world. It's picked up in lots of different national and international media, so it was really nice that we had a positive response. And if we think about some of those benefits, then it's more than just the thermal. So we started to think a little bit more about growth medium, and this is where I suppose, biochar came into the mix. So if we're thinking about green infrastructure in particular, it's obviously it's important that we see good plant performance, and that the green wall is actually supporting the plants. Otherwise, it's not very much of a green wall. So this is just an example from Plymouth, but also from a green wall I saw in Bristol, which looked fairly ropey. And so you started to think about, okay, well, we've got poor plant choice, but also we've potentially got plants in a growing medium that's not suitable. So it's not just obviously impacts on how the plant's performing, but thinking about the true sustainability financial costs of these green walls. So there's many different aspects of particularly something called a living wall, which is these pocket-based systems. They require inputs of water, inputs of nutrients, and all of that comes with a CO2 footprint. So it made me question, particularly if we're thinking about most of these systems having a peat-based compost. So we really need to get the specifics right on this green infrastructure, and that's where I really started to look at biochar as an interesting material, in terms of being able to potentially hold more water, but also to hold on to the nutrients that were being supplied to the green walls. And obviously, one of the driving factors in sustainability of these systems is, and thinking about the overall carbon impact, is the use of a peat-based compost, which is in the UK we keep pushing back the deadline on the ban of peat, but it's approaching. So we've got 2024. We've got the ban on peat-based compost for gardening use, and in 2030 we've got a wider ban for professional horticulture market. And globally, it's a material that's in much need to stay in the ground, and there's obviously a variety of different mechanisms to make sure that we keep that very important carbon store, because it is a very, very significant carbon score globally in where it should be in these peatland habitats. So I suppose building on that, we started to ask the question, okay, can we start to use alternative materials? So what we started to do is play around with different materials and look at thinking about that thermal performance. Okay, well, how do those different materials respond in terms of the thermal conductivity? So how good they are as an insulation material. So we tested a green waste compost, so essentially a compost made from garden waste that's been rotted down. We compared that with something called a fab soil mix, which is a mix we've developed at the University of Plymouth in collaboration with the Eden Project. So this is used in the biomes down at the Eden Project, and it's a mix which is made of some green waste, but also some aggregates, so some sand and some grit, which is left over from mining process in some of the big mines in Cornwall, in southwest of England. So so we tested that mix, and then we also tested this this biochar coconut coir mix. So just simply having a look and thinking about materials and application. So we did some testing of the thermal conductivity of these materials in relation to the soil moisture content. So, and one of the very clear things, and we also tested the organic matter and some of the bulk density. And one of the clear things that came out was that this biochar coconut coir compost seems to have a very, very low thermal conductivity value across a wide range of soil moisture. So, which was very interesting. So this is gravimetric soil moisture content metric. So across a range of soil moisture ranges, we're seeing very, very low thermal conductivity. So if you're thinking about, I suppose, maximizing those insulation benefits of this green infrastructure that could be really giving us energy saving for our leaky buildings, then this might be the material to focus on. So one of the things we did building on that is we were lucky enough, as I said, to work with Trimplants and on doing some testing, so more specifically with some of their biochar. So we thought, okay, well, to separate the impact of the effect of biochar, let's test the additions of biochar to a compost. So we did a test where we had a fully compost mix with no % biochar. We added 15% biochar and we added 30% biochar. And again, we did a similar thing. So this is volumetric soil moisture this time. And we looked at the thermal conductivity values across a range of moisture values. And you can see the addition of 15% biochar and 30% biochar gave significant reductions or lower values, particularly at this lower moisture range. So between 0.2 and 0.5, which is 20 to 50% soil moisture. So most plants typically will be within that range in terms of the moisture values. Anywhere above that starts to get a very different, soil get waterlogged, and it'll be a very different range of plants you would grow, but the majority of plants would fall within this range. So that was quite encouraging in terms of biochar, at least in a thermal perspective. And this is, I've included this graph because I suppose thinking about green infrastructure a bit more widely in the application of this biochar material, there's lots of green infrastructure projects popping up. And one of the things that we wanted to do with our green wall is start to think a bit more holistically about the type of plants we use. Obviously, having plants in our urban environments in particular are becoming more attractive, so much so that people are obviously starting to replace them with Plasticus vulgara. So anybody who knows their Latin will know that is vulgar plastic and common plastic, and we see more and more walls that are plastic based, and obviously the sustainability cost of that is significant. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But so we need to really think about more carefully about the types of plants we use. So on the back of that, then we had an event where we had a green wall failure. So our green wall failed. We had a watering system. So that, as I mentioned, the many inputs that are required to this system. During our summer last year, at the start of the year, we had a failure of a wall system. For me, it really brought into focus. We need to think a bit more carefully about the types of soils we use and the type of plants we use in the system. So can we use lower input plants, so more naturalized and native plants, but also perhaps we can start to use materials like biochar that might give us first of all a greater moisture holding capacity, but also a healthier microbiome, which might allow those pockets of soils to give our plants a bit of resilience in when systems might fail. So on the back of that, we've replanted and we've started to think a bit more carefully about our plants. So we've actually set up a trial on our sustainability hub, which is hosted as University of Plymouth Sustainable Earth Institute, and we've started to mimic some natural green walls, if you like. So this is a Devon bank, so very much live in the temperate rainforest zone, so it's full of ferns and mosses, so it gets lots of ambient moisture. And can we start to replicate that in our buildings? So we've set up this green wall, and this green wall has actually got a range of different biochar treatments that we're looking to test. So we're looking at the moisture holding capacity, but also we're going to be getting students and others to have a look at how these the microbial and root networks that are developing. But really, the project that we've been working on with Trimplants is really thinking about how we grow. So it's not just what we create, but it's how we grow our plant stock. So this applies to green walls, it applies to wider horticulture, but it also applies to us, our agricultural industry, as obviously Caroline's touched on. So we know that so biochar is, as Caroline's introduced, is is a very interesting material and quite fascinating material in terms of its application. So, but I think biochar contains nutrients and physical chemical properties that are very conducive to microbial growth, the microbiome. So one of those benefits is immobilization of nutrients with what are known as plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, which are encouraged by the biochar. And this presents potentially huge potential in agriculture, but also wider horticultural growing in terms of thinking about biochar as a biofertilizer. So reducing those large inputs of inorganic organic fertilizer that we still rely on. So think about nitrogen alone. I think it's been estimated it's at least 2% of the overall carbon emissions value on its own. So that's about any of the direct impacts on different systems. So it's a promising candidate to support more sustainable agricultural methods. There's a few different mechanisms. So you've got a highly porous structure, you've got nutrients that derive from the biomass. So as Caroline's mentioned, it's mostly carbon, but there's lots of other materials and chemicals that are naturally derived as that plant is growing, that are contained in biochar. You've got those high water retention properties, but also those high nutrient retention properties, holding on to more of the nutrients that we're supplying to our ever depleted soils. But I suppose one of the take homes, and I suppose that our results really fit into that, is that the context is really important. So whilst and there's different figures around, but Wang et al. Estimate 5% of global carbon emissions. There's actually the impacts are very case specific. So it's all about the context. So can we start to think about biochar as and start to really tune, I suppose, these physiochemical properties of biochar for different uses? So thinking about the range of different contexts that we might use biochar. So it's always about the context, I think. And there's a range of different factors that affect the context and the usefulness of this material. So you have obviously thinking about the biochar alone, you've got the pyrolysis temperature, as has already been mentioned. You've got the incubation time, so how long it's been in this material and available to support that microbial community. You've got the rate of application, so how much you apply, the feedstock types, or what you use, the structural properties, therefore, of that material. But also in terms of its mix with soil, you've got impacts on temperature, you've got effects on soil organic carbon, you've got changes in pH, changes in soil texture in particular, if you've got large pieces of biochar, but also in those alterations in soil moisture, as we already mentioned. So our project really, and again, this is what I'm going to do is introduce some preliminary results, but essentially, so after working with Terry and having a chat to Terry about the wider horticultural sector, so he's obviously someone who's been working in this environment for a number of years, and thinking about how can we use start to reduce the use of fertilizers. So our first question was, are there any plant-specific changes in plant performance? Biomass, so how big are the plants, but also the chemical composition of those plants with the addition of biochar. And then we wanted to ask, are there specific plant-specific changes in plant performance, biomass, but also the chemical composition of biochar from different inoculation methods. So activated carbon is, I'm sure, something you've heard of. So you can activate it with inoculating a range of different nutrients and different teas. So I've highlighted these green because these are active questions that we've got data in for and we're analysing. The red question is something that is in track. So this is investigating the role of feedstock type in terms of some of those questions on plant performance. So does what the type of biochar we select affect our performance of those different plant types? So we're moving on to that in the next stage of our project, and we're hoping to get some more funding to be able to do that. So we had 5 compost treatments. So we had a fertilized compost. So we used something, decided to use something that was widely used in the horticultural sector. So I think it was mentioned you can use a range of things, and thinking about biochar as a replacement for peat at the moment. This is a widely used compost, so which is added with a slow release fertilizer. So still having to fertilize it, but then after 3 months, that compost becomes ineffective. So it seems so waste that we can't hold on to those nutrients. So can we start to add biochar? So our second treatment was to look at 10% additions of biochar. So this hadn't been activated, so simply biochar product made by Trimplants. Our third treatment was the effect of inoculation. So 10% biochar had been inoculated by Trimplants in the mix that Carolyn talked about. So molasses, worm casts, and a bit of compost in the mix, and that was brewed for around 24 hours. And then again, this fertilized compost, 10% biochar that's been inoculated with something called Goop. So this is a company called Soilsmiths who are making a microbial mix, which they claim has the microbes are going to be supportive of plant growth. And then we looked at, okay, well, we've got a compost that's made on site, so let's test that with some 10% biochar. So these are our compost mixes that we thought we'd have a look at. And then we had 4 different plant types. So I mentioned that plant type. Would be interesting to see, what are the plant-specific responses. So these are some plants that are widely used by Trimplants, quite different forms, and it would be interesting to see the role of these 5 treatments on these different biochar, these different plant types. So we've got a range of different species. So we've got a Gracillunia, which is an evergreen shrub, widely used in horticulture, fairly quick growing, mostly around all year. We've got a Betony, which is a beautiful native plant to the UK, which is an herbaceous perennial, beautiful purple flower. And again, it's been used by Trimplants in green wall schemes. Nepeta, again, another herbaceous perennial, and then Festuca comans, so it's a fescue grass, so graminoid species. So this was our setup, and then we looked at setting up a trial at Terry's greenhouse at Trimplants nurseries. We've got a range of greenhouses, and he was we're lucky enough he gave us some space to start to test, do some trials on these growth mediums. So we potted these plants, infant plants, in May 2023. So some very young plants, which had very infant root systems, and they were potted up in those different mixes, and then they were grown on the summer we've just had. Between May and September, and we've got 6 pots for each. So we had to, given the funding we had and the time we needed to analyse, we need to sort of keep conservative in what we were doing. So following those growth trials, we started to test the chlorophyll fluorescence throughout that growing period, and in September, plants were taken into the lab. This is previous picture was my colleague Naufel. Oh, apologies. It's my colleague Naufel, who you can see taking these chlorophyll fluorescence images. So this just gives you an idea of the type of parameters we've been measuring. So we've been looking at the chlorophyll fluorescence. So I'll talk about that in the next slide. We've been using NDVI as measures of plant performance. So these are both widely used measures of plant, particularly photosynthetic performance. And then we've got a number of biomass parameter measurements, so looking at the fresh weight of the plants, the height, the total leaf area, but also we're going to be looking at dry weight, chlorophyll content, and then the roots, so the fresh weight, the dried weight, the length, and then also the biochemical measurements, so the CNN ratio in leaves, roots, and soils. So I've color coded it because green is what we have results for in. I mentioned, and the red is what we've currently got coming in. So those data are still being analysed and will be shared when we have them available. So FV over FM, as I mentioned, is a chlorophyll fluorescence parameter. It quantifies the efficiency of photosystem 2. So obviously plants have 2 photosystems. This is the second one. It's a significant one, and this FV over FM parameter is widely used in plant stress trials. So you can see some imagery of the type of work that will be generated. An NDVI, so this is NDVI, and this looks at difference between near infrared, which vegetation reflects, and red light, which vegetation absorbs. And you can use that to come up with this parameter, which gives you an idea of how healthy your leaves are. So we've got these 2 different parameters. This is what our flora imager at the university looks like. So we brought our plants in and had a look at them under this piece of imagery, a piece of technology to develop our to generate that data. And on the right, the picture shows the image, the way we've taken our leaf area. So we've removed that biomass and we've had a look at the overall leaf area. We've used a bit of software called ImageJ. We've also had a look at the fresh and dry weight of our plant roots. So at the moment, Naufel's been washing the roots. And as you can see, it's a really nice picture of how biochar really does, and how those roots really do make use of that biochar. So it's actually very, very difficult to be able to wash off those pieces of biochar. It's very, very notable. So we're looking at measuring the dry mass. So these will be being dried at the moment of all our plants, and we're going to have a look at, okay, well, what's the biomass? We're also going to have a look at using a piece of software called RhizoVision. This is openly available software which we're using to classify our root systems into coarse roots and fine roots, and in terms of where those nutrients are going. So you know, are our plants suffering in terms of being able to support their own nutrition? We're going to have a look at the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen ratio using this piece of kit that we have at the university. So as a reminder, so what I'm going to do now is just introduce some initial results. So just as a reminder, I've color-coded the different compost treatments. So when we have a look at our bar charts, they coordinate with the equivalent bars, the bar charts. So again, these are initial results. So we're still going through what all this means. So this is the leaf normalized as an NDVI. So again, a key plant performance parameter. And there's some obvious things that stood out. So what's quite interesting seems to be is that Betony and Griselinia, at least, we see no difference from any of the soil compost treatments. But for Nepeta and the Festuca, we see significant differences between each of the treatments. So we see a significant plant effect, a significant compost effect. So there's differences between our plants in terms of that NDVI. there's differences in compost, but also there seems to be a plant soil interaction. So we seem to see that where the performance levels are lower, we see more differentiation. So if we look at the specific graphs, so we see our green bar, a yellow bar, and a red bar are, so this is no biochar. We actually see no difference really with our biochar on its own, but with our inoculated biochar, we see a step up in our NDVI values of our festook and peat. So it's highly plant specific, but also highly compost specific. Interestingly, if we're thinking about differences, our compost does make a real difference. So it seems to be we have a jump up from our compost, our fertilized compost and biochar, our compost that Terry's produced, biochar, so differential compost. So this biochar inoculant has allowed us to essentially move up in performance to what might be a better performing compost overall. And that seems to be a pattern that's true for the fescue. So there is lots of quite specific impacts in terms of the plants and the time to use this product. So when the plants are very healthy, there's minimal impact, but actually where you see lower NDVI, so anywhere below about 0.6 is when the plant is suffering, you see a differential impact of our plant, but also particularly our plant inoculants. And if we look at FE over FM, we see a similar thing. So we see a plant effect, we see a compost effect, but we also see a plant soil and a plant compost interaction. And for this case, it's particularly the fescue where we see differences. So we see a jump up from our simply fertilized compost, where with the biochar additions and the inoculated biochar additions, we see a jump up in performance. And for plant shoot and leaf biomass, again, we see plant soil, plant effect, compost effect, and a plant soil interaction. Some quite different figures here again. And we're still, again, like I said, it's early days. We've got these results recently, and we're starting to work out what this all means. But I think, I suppose, so this just gives a summary of what we've seen. So we see significant plant effect, compost effect, and compost plant interaction. So let's go to the previous slide. We see no difference in stem thickness and leaf area from compost and plant effect. So we've got quite a very specific. So the context really is the important thing. So I suppose as a bit of a sort of take-home message, we see plant performance. So differences in plant performance and the role of biochar and inoculant method is highly specific to plant and overall health status, it seems to be from those initial results. Inoculation of biochar seems to have a significant impact for the photosynthetic performance of these plants, but only some of the plants. So where they're already doing quite good, they're quite happy, but where in situations where you've got a plant that's maybe not performing as it should do, then biochar does seem to be making a difference in raising that performance. But the biochar companion, so what you put with the compost you add to it is a significant factor in its application. So it's working out, okay, well, what context do we use this material? And then I suppose caveated with, this is a 4-month trial with limited plants. We had limited funding. We actually really need some longer term understanding. And this is where we really need to, it would be great to have some more opportunities to do some more funded research to really develop this further, to be able to understand how we can reduce fertilizer input, save a whole load of industries money, and also do some really good stuff for the environment. So it'd be great to have some longer term studies. So as a reminder, given that context of results, I've only presented stuff in green. We're would be great to be really interesting to see what our nutritional and so our carbon hydrogen nitrogen ratios are for our plants, but also those root dry weight, length, weight, and morphology. So this is just a picture of Carolyn and Terry coming to join us, and Jess Berry, Dr. Jess Berry, giving us a tour of the electron microscopy centre. So to pair alongside these trials, we're also, as Carolyn mentioned, using electron microscopy to do some analysis of so we're using scanning electron microscopes, but also a technique called EDX, so elemental composition of biochar. So we're actually going to be taking, and we have taken samples for each of those treatments, and we're having a look at what is contained in each of the biochar from those materials. So we'll be able to break down and have a look at the carbon, and you can see the number of different elements that's contained in biochar. We're also looking at classifying some of these, so it's great to use this centre to be able to have a look in a bit more detail at the range of different organisms, the structures that are created in biochar. It's really fascinating to look into a world we don't often see it. So this will be a key part of the paper that we'll be releasing, some of the imagery captured, some of the detail. So I mentioned this EDX technique. What that allows us to do is actually, as well as giving us pretty pictures, it allows us to quantify some of the elements that we've got. So this is just an example from another paper. So it's a widely used approach in biochar analysis, and this is pulling out some of the different range of different elements we see. So we're going to be doing a similar thing for our samples. And then this is a nice, interesting study, which we're thinking about the next steps then of our study. We'll look to think about more clearly. So this is a very nice paper which is doing a similar thing. So it's using EDX and it's starting to characterize this biochar. So they've been using brash from conifers that are grown on peatlands. So you're going from a situation where your habitat in, so we mentioned that peatland carbon store in crisis with these conifers that are grown on it, a waste product, and they're starting to biochar and start to analyze to create a product in biochar, and trying to be specific about what they make. So they're starting to look at how they make their biochar and characterizing it. So this is quite an interesting paper that I think is useful. So building on that, in terms of, I mentioned that third research question, it's starting to think about where we get our biochar from. So if we think about a European landscape, I'm in Devon, so Devon landscape, we've got our hedgerows, but we've got many different waste materials that really deserve a function. So we want to start to test how does the type of material used, in this case wood from willow. I put a picture of rhododendron. So rhododendron is a big problem in many of our woodland systems, Atlantic oak woodlands. It's a widely invasive plant. So we're going to be looking at testing the structure of this rhododendron and its chemical composition. We were using ash trees. So again, ash tree is a beautiful canopy tree where it's obviously suffering from ash dieback all across Europe, and is being widely felled. So there's lots of this material available. We're going to be testing hazel, again a plant that's very conducive to producing a product within hedgerows and woods. We can look at some of that brash, that kind of brash that's been looked at in another study, and we're going to look at dogwood as well, which is again a fairly quick growing species. So the next stage of our project is really we want to really build on thinking this product as a potentially a highly useful product that is very specific to context, but also deserves to be researched to be able to understand how we can best use it. So if we think about the way these different materials and different trees grow, they've got very different physiologies and different growth rates. That makes a difference to their structure. So anybody who's worked with any of these materials will know they're very different, even though they're all what essentially have a woody material. They're quite different in terms of their structure, and how that makes an impact on the biochar we produce, I think, is an important question. And can we start to specifically look at particular materials and make use of that waste material and make use of it in context to improve our growing environments and our carbon sequestration, all the other benefits that Cameron's mentioned. So this is in terms of next steps. Then we're starting to look at. We're hoping to be able to bring all these results together and publish them in a scientific journal. And then next step, I've got bags of biochar from those different areas. I'm going to be running them in our electron microscopy centre, and hopefully doing some plant trials, which is what I want to do. Be really nice to expand on that. And I've just put this as the last slide because I think it's just important thinking about the whole cycle. So not just thinking about how we manage our ecosystems and our habitats, our hedgerows and our agricultural systems, but I suppose how we think forward in terms of woodland restoration, wider habitat, carbon in our natural systems. So this is just a picture from Devon, where lots of volunteers got together and collected seeds from Wistman's Woods, which is a very famous old temperate rainforest in Devon. And then this is another picture of a site that's been established. So trees have been planted in the last 10 years. And it's we'll hear lots of good and bad stories in terms of woodland restoration. So there's been lots of failures in recent years. There's big tree planting programs occurring all across Europe. There's been high failure rates in some areas. HS2 is one of the standout ones in the UK. Can we actually start to think a bit more carefully about when we're restoring our woodlands using a product like biochar, which might support woodland and tree establishment in poorer soils as the microbiome starts to change from a grassland ecosystem to a woodland ecosystem. And then, if we think of the added benefits, we're starting to, that obviously that material is going to be in the soil for potentially thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. So I think it's definitely worthy of more thought in terms of proving that we can get some significant benefits from biochar. So I would really like to have the opportunity to research and have some more funding to be able to research the impact of biochar on this opportunity. So that is it. Thank you for listening. I realize it's probably gone over time. Yeah, it'd be great to have any questions and thoughts, really. So yeah, thank you.
Has anybody got any questions for Tom? Thank you, Tom. Yeah, Marcus and
hi, Dorothea. I'm with Marcus. Hi there. I'm intrigued by the green wall because as a plants person, I've been sort of researching, and about 13 years ago I used biochar in my allotment plot because I inherited an allotment plot that was so poor, the soil was so poor. I think they've been double digging for years, and it just was really poor quality. So I put in a lot of soil improving stuff like compost and manure and so forth, but I decided to make some biochar, and I dug a pit and made my own biochar, and because I'd read about it in some place on the Amazon River, so I followed their sort of the sort of primitive way of making it, and I found that the soil, one of the things I did notice with it was that it increased the mycelium in the soil. So I had a lot of fungal growth, which was great. Beneath the soil when I didn't dig it anymore, and I can't say it's all down to the biochar, because of course at the same time I was experimenting with other stuff to improve the soil. 12 years on, the soil has increased dramatically, but I have constantly mulched it with my own homemade compost. I've experimented with different compost, and I found that the stuff that was made from the materials that came from the plot were the best compost. And I suppose there's this sort of cycle that they know where it's come from, and the microbial life recognized, maybe, I don't know, maybe things that grew in the compost that was made there was amazing. So I can't definitely say that it was just down to the biochar. We've made it a few times since, I suppose twice, is it? And both times we've put it in other areas, and it's worked really, you know, it's I wish I'd, looking back on what you've done, I wish I'd kept it not mixed with anything else and seen as a proper experiment. But it definitely retains water. But then I also use a lot of sheep's wool as mulch, and I do mulch with and like this last year we had that very dry start to the summer. I felt that what was needed was some sort of mulch, really. The biochar was fine, but I think if the soil isn't mulched, it's going to dry out. And going back to your green wall, what I have looked at that green wall several times when I've been to talks there, and it doesn't hold moisture. It aerates too quickly, and plus I know you mentioned there were aggregates in a compost that you got from Cornwall somewhere, in one of the biomes, but really you do need those aggregates because it's what the plant roots rely on, with the microbial life, breaking it up into water-soluble powder. So you do need aggregates within your pockets, but your pockets dry out too fast. So you need things that hold the moisture in. This almost seems to be, looking at it as a, because I did design, as a designer and a plants person, almost needs like another layer in front to hold the moisture. And I think part of it, those pockets are designed sort of, they're not designed by plants people, I don't think anyway. And I'm not surprised it dried out and died during the summer, to be quite honest. But as far as biochar is concerned, it works really well in retaining water, because my soil has improved dramatically. And one of the ways you see your soil improve is like the path. When I took over my soil, the path was much higher than the soil, and now they're almost equal. So, and I've been there 16 years, and in 16 years, through different applications of biochar and other soil improvers, I've seen that growth. So it's possible to increase the growth, and I would say most of that was probably in the last 12 years, that soil increase. So, but I'm just trying. I was here putting my designer head on, trying to think about those pockets and how we could improve it. And you almost need something in front of it, so that plants can still grow through it, but it's some way of holding moisture, because that's what it is. It's holding moisture in when there's those pockets.
I don't think those pockets had biochar in, did they? The ones that died, Tom?
No.
The experiments were done in the lab.
Yeah, but even biochar, I don't mean.
But I mean, what's interesting?
It can hold the moisture.
No, what's interesting is those roots have connected behind. You can't see it behind, but they have totally interconnected behind. So the new wall has biochar in. So we'll see what happens with the new wall, because it may retain that extra moisture and might not die like that one did, because I didn't water our garden that we've got, our vegetable garden at all during that whole hot period. And the only difference was I had biochar in it compared to other people. So yeah, it's about trialing, isn't it, and testing.
But how are those roots going to get the nutrients? Because it needs the minerals from...
but they're fed. I mean, in the university, it's a whole setup. So there's probes in each pocket. So it's a test environment rather than a kind of live environment. It's really for experimentation.
Yeah, I get that.
I'm definitely, those living wall system. I mean, that's why it's interesting, because they're fed with water and nutrients, and like you're right, all that ends is very well drained. Which I think I remember speaking to the company who developed the system, and you want the balance between the aeration of the roots. So they obviously don't want to create any anoxia in the soil environment. So they were constantly fighting this battle between water and too much water and not enough. But again, what you want is a moderated environment, don't you? So I guess the more organic matter and material that you would have to be able to, I suppose this system, they're washing it, those pockets with water and nutrients, but at the moment they've been going out of the system rather than being held on. And I think actually be interesting to see that, because now we've replaced it with these biochar treatments. So I mean, we're talking about biochar's capacity to be able to take in those nutrients and hold on to them, and it will be interesting to see. I mean, again, it's an open question. I don't think it's, will it work? Will it be effective? I think it's potentially quite an interesting area where we could use biochar.
I was just interested because of the to keep the microbial life alive in there, it needs that moisture constant, and by feeding it with chemical fertilizers, you kill that life anyway. So you'd have to only have organic fertilizer, but keeping it alive in having that moisture. And I've been sat here listening and thinking, how can a wall retain that moisture? And that's really what's been
surprising how many microbes are in that wall, though, and microorganisms is absolutely packed.
The number of microorganisms is really interesting. So we had a master's project that I supervised where we it's very dependent on plant types, obviously. So certain plant types you will see the type of invertebrate diversity and abundance that was, so UKCEH, Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, released loads of some estimates of soil invertebrates. They've got a soil invertebrate database, and the abundance was actually comparable to natural soils, which is amazing on some of the plants, which I was astounded by, really. So in some of those little pockets, you've got a minimum of 50 different macroinvertebrates, so they're not the microbes, but yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, isn't it, in terms of microbial community? Be interesting.
Is there much fungal life in there?
I thought it was minimal, actually, from what I saw, but again, that we haven't actually specifically tested it, but from observation you can normally see the hyphae in soil fairly quickly. There was minimal hyphae, so the fungal the amount of fungal community was minimal. But again, that might be an interest area in terms of, can we start to inoculate these systems with suitable fungal partners? And if we're to thinking about the resilience of a green wall, maybe that in terms of water retention and a whole host of things, is often those plant fungal interactions, isn't it? So yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting area, definitely, to development. I think we're only just touching the surface of what we can do, really, with a wide type of green infrastructure.
And it's going to get more and more important for cities, as the climate is changing, getting hotter and hotter cities. We need something natural to just decrease the temperature, and that's why you're seeing massive development green walls in Barcelona, in Singapore,
the Far East. I mean, they're developing whole cities of which are green cities.
Yeah, I'm from Singapore originally, and I was there last year, and I visited quite a lot of green walls while I was there. But they have the moisture, the humidity, And whilst it's very hot, they do have the benefit of great rainfall and humidity.
Yeah, but Barcelona doesn't, and they're also doing the same. Paris is doing the same, so it's happening kind of in different places.
Yeah, and the Middle East as well are really investing in it. So
yeah. Were there any other questions? Because I know we're overrunning.
Yeah, Philip.
Unmute. Just a super quickie. As I said, I'm a total novice, biochar novice, but I am a horticulturist. I'm a plants person, and I have noticed a difference. And I just shot off on my break to get some food because I hadn't eaten, and I've brought this. I got a sample of the biochar that I've been collecting. It's super light. I know it's probably not made in the traditional sense, whatever traditional means, but it's
You'll have to bring it over and we'll have a look at it.
Yeah, it's well, I'm just thinking that log burners or super efficient log burners is the one I've got with maximum or minimum oxygen and maximum temperature is worth considering, because I think it might be another way, possibly, just putting it out there just to say it might be another way to produce biochar. And it certainly has made a huge difference on the plants I've tested it with. And I separate the ash. I'm not using ash, I'm not using soot, I'm just using the residual pieces of super light, almost like
it's like charcoal. Yeah.
And it's making a difference, and I'm also using it for the vegetables and stuff now as well, and I'm seeing huge differences there. So I don't know, just putting it out there, maybe it's something worth thinking about.
Tom.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks so much, Tom. That was awesome. I'd love to see more of your research. I want you to do funding. Good luck. And I think so important what you're doing. The green roofs as well. It should be like such a good amendment for that. And my question was like, I have contacted a few people who have been making biochar. You know, they're developing biochar stove technologies, and I've been sort of signposted by some other people in our composting network that there's a lot of biochar coming. I think there's going to be and knowing how to test that biochar, like I found one company, Capchar, that can deliver biochar for £100 a ton, not including delivery. That seems like very good value biochar to me. And I'm thinking about investing in it for like making a tree planting compost product, because we run this ultra soil composting network that you're all invited to join, by the way, and it's about trying to make the best use of our local resources to make biologically complete compost sort of inspired by the Soil Food Web, and then supply that locally for everything from regenerative gardening to farming, in the most effective ways possible. It's quite an interesting little hive activity going on across the country and further afield, but biochar could be a really useful way of, like, as a carrier for that biology back into the landscape. So I love the idea of like making a tree planting compost and just getting that out there as much as possible, but testing the biochar, like we can do the earthworm tests, we can do these biological tests, but I'm wondering if you had any input on that. Like, how do we test it? Could we send it to you? Is there a way of looking under the microscope and saying, that's got too high VOCs, don't buy it? Is there any information you could share there?
I mean, we could test that in the lab, obviously. So we could run it through. So we've obviously got a range of labs, and I've got colleagues who are more chemists than me. So I look at sort of physiology of plants and a little bit of chemistry, but obviously if we were looking at specific biochar, we can obviously use our electron microscopy center and chemists who look at VOCs and a whole range of different chemistries. So I mean, if you've got something interesting.
Would the price be for like a biochar test? Like, is it a service you would do, or I mean?
I mean, we have like a consultancy arm of our university where we can offer a consultancy service. But if there's research interest, then cool. we can have a conversation. But definitely, we can investigate that. So I'd say just.
I mean, we are testing 7 or 8 feedstocks anyway at the moment, Tom. So that can feed into that.
Exactly.
And I suppose the other thing you've been using, Tom has actually planted biochar, or our brash biochar, on a quite a big planting area on Dartmoor, haven't you, with new trees? So that's another piece that we can talk about another day. And there's also PhD students, master's students, you know, if we can get a few of those involved, then we get to use the university equipment.
And for them, and for them, it's really, it's interesting because it's an applied project. So it makes their project so much more interesting because they've got someone who's developing something and who's actually, you know, they're typically environmental science students or chemistry students who might actually really want to have a project that could actually do something. So I'd say just let's keep in touch, I guess. And
I'd love to,
you know, because I work in a lot with woodland restoration. So I'm a trustee of a charity. I've worked in woodland restoration for 12 years, native woodland restoration. So your point on its place in ecosystem restoration, I think, is key. So, you know, the UN has a decade. The next decade is the decade on ecosystem restoration. And I think how we do that is going to be really important. And I think biochar actually has a really interesting role to play in terms of that microbiome and that soil environment, which we often forget when we think. So I could see actually that biochar product and that compost product being really important when it comes to tree planting and sites where you haven't seen trees in the landscape for sometimes thousands of years. They might need a helping hand, and you know, if you can bring if you can support more trees and ensure that you don't have large-scale deaths of trees through our more uncertain climate, and you know, we're seeing more and more extreme weather events, then I think that's going to be a really interesting area. It'd be great to test that. So again, maybe we can work all together and on that. And that would be really good. But again, we need to try and fund it. That's the only thing. It's funding my time. I'm on sort of short-term contracts, and Carolyn puts in so much effort and work, which is unpaid, and pretty much because she's her and Terry have sort of got a passion for it and want to do the right thing. But we basically need more funding. And it seems like we should be able to do it because, you know, there's lots of ways that this is a really good material and is actually going to help us get to where we need to in terms of net zero. So you hope someone's going to start investing to really find out more about how we use the material.
Yeah, we heard about that big pot of money. Hopefully it'll come soon.
Yeah.
At least it may come from the sequestration side. Don't know, but
so I guess we can share our details. So I'd say feel free to get in contact and we can keep those connections going. It's nice to meet more and more people who are interested in biochar.
Dave?
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Tom. It was very nice.
Pleasure. Yeah.
I just had a yes, nice to see you again. I just had a quick question. If the results that you were seeing, are they generally in the area of what you were expecting? And for, I guess, the results that you're about to produce, what are you kind of expecting? I guess I'm especially curious about the ratio of nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, and also the root structure that you're looking at, like the major and the minor roots. I'm kind of curious what you're sort of expecting to see there.
Yeah, in terms of what I've seen, and I suppose you can never really prepare because there's always surprises. So I'm sort of, some of it looks, I would have sort of expected some sort of plant soil effect, maybe not as dramatically actually, because it's very specific in terms of those plant compost, highly specific actually in some cases. So that was really interesting. I suppose what I would expect to see from the carbon and nitrogen in particular. So I suppose if we're thinking about biochar providing a more conducive environment and allowing those nutrients to be held within the compost and be more accessible to our plants, we might see within our root systems and our shoots a higher nitrogen to carbon ratio. So often, your carbon nitrogen, your carbon is higher than your nitrogen, where you might have a deficit of nitrogen. You might be nitrogen limited. So I sort of would expect that. And in terms of the roots, from what I've seen, it seems to be those fine roots, so that are particularly prevalent where you've got biochar, so they'll be scabbering around for some of those nutrients. So I might expect to see a greater proportion of fine roots to coarse root, so a greater fine root to coarse root ratio, I guess. But yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what we get. And if, I mean, you never get what you expect.
And in a way, we had one, well, it kind of makes sense, but the one that's coming out the best is the heap of compost that happened to be made in a field, which is just wood chippings that have been left there for 6 or 7 years. And we just threw that into the mix at the last minute, thinking, well, it would be good to add something else in. And that is coming out the best. So it kind of makes sense because it's in the natural environment. It's been made, it's just been left. It was wood chippings at one stage, and it's been sat in a field and it's become a compost. And that's the one that's coming out top.
It's got to be to do with the fungal dominance of that wood chip, hasn't it?
Yeah. And interestingly, normally we always say to put an inoculation on for, a little bit of time before using it. In this case, we had news that we didn't have the project. So all of the preparations that I'd prepared, I kind of thought, okay, we haven't got the project, so I'll just chuck them onto the garden area. And then suddenly Tom came back and said, oh, they've come back to us and we've got the funding. So everything that I prepared, we then went with an inoculation that was just like, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. So it was really quick. So it was amazing to see so much microbial activity with so little inoculation in a way.
Yeah, there's a significant effect after quite minimal.
Yeah, really minimal. And the day we did the plants, it was so hot, those poor roots really dried out. So it's no wonder some of them were under stress. The lavender particularly was under stress, wasn't it? And the catnip, because it was just so hot when we were doing it and trying to pot up 500 little pots or however many we did. With all the different mixes, in 30 odd degree heat, it's no wonder some of the plants were under stress. So
any other questions? I'm aware I've spoken. I definitely got another one unless anyone else wants to go.
Ed?
I just wanted, brilliant presentation. I just wanted to sort of I didn't hear much about the ash dieback. You was talking about having some woodland management thing, and I think I've seen, might have been from you Tom, about using it around the roots of trees that have ash dieback and it being beneficial. We've got loads. I'm here in Kent. We have a huge amount of ash dead on the hill here, and I was just wondering, is it something that we could look into? Is it something that we might be able to sort of point a study towards? Because it feels like there's a whole load of ash there that could be turned into biochar, probably in situ, and then go straight into protecting what's left of our ash trees here locally.
Yeah, there's been some good studies on ash actually, and ones that have been treated with biochar and compost haven't succumbed to the disease in the same way as those that haven't. And there's a project, what are they called, Tom? Earthly.
I've just posted the link.
Okay.
Earthly Biochar.
Yeah.
Save the Ash Tree. Their project is, they're looking for ambassadors and citizen science participators and all kinds of people now. So yeah, it's worth signing up to that, definitely.
And I think the other thing, there's 20% of ash trees that are actually becoming more resistant, but they're getting cut down anyway. So they're kind of trying to help themselves, but then if we're cutting them down, we're not going to help them build up that resilience. So I mean,
what we need to be doing is, because I think you're right, I mean, we're overusing the chainsaw because they are everywhere, ash trees, but I mean, in terms of that, I think in Devon we got about 5 years ago, it was really apparent as it spread from east to west across the country. But I've noticed that a lot are taken out when they really don't need to be. So I can understand taking them out in a setting where you've got, members of the public around. But I think we really need to think of, if we're managing that resource, which what it is, isn't it? Then if we take down all the trees, we need to leave opportunities for the next generation to select more resistant strains. So if we can use biochar to support those remaining ash trees, then I think that it would be a really good strategy. So yeah, I think and more widely, I think we need to think more holistically about making our woodlands and showing that our woodlands are actually they're valuable in they produce really good things, and that so actually getting people to appreciate that they're not just that they're important, and they're actually very useful. We used to spend a lot of time in woodlands as human beings, and not very long ago we were making lots of different things from woodlands, and there's so I think thinking more widely about how we can make use of all the different parts of our trees and our different woodlands, I think is really, really important. So yeah, I think the connection is really nice actually there to biochar and woodland creation and woodland management. I think it's a really key link.
Yeah, it's a pity we only put value on dead wood rather than living wood. It makes its money when it's removed, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, really nice to meet lots of people. It's really good. Yeah, good to meet. Yeah, we had really good questions. Yeah, let's keep in touch. It'd be really nice to maybe make it. We could even do a sort of, be nice to have more, some regular talks with people who are interested in biochar.
Yeah, maybe we do another.
Give you an update, another update when we've got some results in.
Yeah, when we've got the rest of the results, we can do another Zoom, can't we?
Definitely.
Any other quick questions? Else we'll call it.
I'm fascinated about using it with biochar and bokashi. There's a lot of bokashi going on. Any experiments there, or just with compost? It's a good growth amendment, bokashi.
Yeah, I was talking to Agriton actually about doing something, because we met just before Christmas, but he said the experiments that they had done with biochar hadn't really shown very much.
Okay,
but I'm thinking surely it has to. I don't see how it wouldn't really. So yeah, we.
But maybe it's just the fungal thing, because bokashi is not, it's lactobacillus, isn't it? And it's not. It seems to be that the most promising stuff with biochar is where there's clearly fungi partnering with, it's just the structures just go perfectly together, don't they? So yeah, stick to what's working really. I think just develop that.
Yeah, I think it's nice to experiment with lots of different things and then just see. Could be a different context, different soil, different whatever, things change, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Different amendments at different stages in the growing cycle and processes, the season. So yeah. Lovely. Well, thank you so much, guys. Really incredible work. And appreciate it.
Thank you very much for joining. Nice to meet you all.
Will you guys email something out after this so that we can sort of pick up?
I'm not sure I've got everybody's emails. If everybody wants to email me, then I can do that, because some of you have come through other people's, so then I wouldn't have let me put my email on the chat, and then you can send me an email.
Right. Okay.
But Philip, your point about the biochar and charcoal, I think it's really interesting about people, if we can get people in their home through to manufacture biochar inadvertently, or something that's doing a similar role to biochar, then why not?
Sure. I mean, that's exactly how it happened. Like I said, I'm a horticulturalist, and I just saw the differences, and I was just like, made this, and it seems very close to the product you're talking about, but like as you say, probably needs some testing. Cool.
Yeah, you can. There is a box you can buy, like a metal box that you can put in your wood burner, and you put wood with. I've seen that. You put small pieces of woods in the metal box, and then you put that in your wood burner.
Sure, a biscuit tin.
Biscuit tin, yeah.
But it pretty much is a big biscuit tin. It's air out, air in, and you can shut it off, so you can completely control the oxygen. It's a little bit like biochar.
Yeah. You have to bring some over.
Sure.
Have a look at it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah.
Let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of we have a lot going on down at the Eco Hub, so I just post it on Trimplants website or on our Facebook page. So you're all welcome anytime.
think you've had Anita Roy there from Transition Town Wellington a few times, I believe.
Anita, no, she's not been yet. I know Anita very well, but no, I keep saying come over. I keep coming to her thing, but I came to something in Wellington last week. But yeah, no, she's not been over. But we do talk a lot.
Yes, I thought you did.
Yeah, we do.
She's been talking about you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
See
you,
you.
folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Cheerio.
Well done.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
We'll yeah, I don't know when we're oh, hang on.